Well, here we are, and we have our Bibles open again, and I think just one verse this time. Colossians chapter 3, verse 13. Why don't I read it for us as we start? Bear with each other, and forgive whatever grievances you may have against one another. Forgive, says the Apostle Paul, as the Lord forgave you. Well, I'm a pastor here in London, England, and one of the most common conversations that I have with people is with those who've been hurt, who have been wounded by their experience of church. They feel their contribution hasn't been valued. They feel their gifts haven't been recognized. They feel that they've not been respected, that they've become a victim of gossip or rumor or slander. And, well, whatever the reason, there are an amazing number of people who have been damaged, who are disillusioned, disappointed. And very often those people have simply walked away. They've just left the church. And sometimes what happens is that they walk away not only from the church, but from the Lord. The anger, the pain, the resentment, the bitterness that they felt towards the Lord's people has bled over into their relationship with the Lord Himself. And that angerness, that anger, that pain, that bitterness has been turned towards Him. Oh, they're angry with Him. They're bitter towards Him. They are resentful towards Him. And time and again, I want to turn these people to Colossians chapter 3, verse 13. If only we could learn to meditate on verses like this. If only we could learn to think it through. If only we could consider the implications. I think we'd find that a number of insights rise to the surface. And the first is simply this. We come into church knowing that there will be things in our experience of fellowship with other Christians. There will be things that we will need to forgive. There will be people, there will be situations, there will be circumstances that we will need to bear with. Otherwise, well, Paul simply would never have had to write this verse. The only reason he writes this, the only reason he exhorts us and encourages us, commands us even to bear with each other, to forgive whatever grievances we may have against one another. The reason that's there is because we will need to do it. There will be grievances, many and varied, that we will have to forgive. There will be people, situations, circumstances, and we will have to bear with them. There's a little rhyme that you may have come across that runs like this. To dwell above with the saints in love, that will indeed be glory, but here below, with the saints I know, now that's a different story. And we smile at it precisely because we know how true it is. Yes, there will be a day, a glorious day, when we will see Jesus Christ as He is. And because we have seen Him as He is, we will be transformed. We will be changed. We will be like Him. And on that day, when I am like Jesus and you are like Jesus because we've seen Him as He is, then when we come together in fellowship, that fellowship will be deep and rich and sweet and powerful and edifying. But that day is yet to come. Well, I want you to notice too in this verse the reciprocity. See what Paul says? Bear with each other. Forgive whatever grievances you may have against one another. You see, in our tendency to pride and arrogance, we read a verse like this and we come away and we walk into our church, we walk into the congregations we're a part of, we walk into our relationships with each other, and we sort of sit back and say, well, Paul, thank you very much. You know, I'm looking around and I see these people, and what you are calling me to rings so true. I see how far short they fall of the reality of who Christ is, and thank you for reminding me that I will have to be patient with them. Thank you for reminding me that I will have to bear with them. But that's not quite what Paul says, is it? Forgive each other. Bear with one another. Yes, there are days when I will have to forgive others. There are days when I will have to bear with others. But here's the thing. I'm not like Christ either. Not yet. And so there will be days when you will have to bear with me. There are days when you will have to forgive me, as my lack of Christ-likeness damages you, hurts you, and brings you to the place where you will have to face the temptation, wrestle with the temptation, resist the temptation to walk away from the church because of who I am, because of the way I have behaved, because of the way I have treated you. Realizing the reciprocity of Colossians 3:13 is a deeply humbling experience. And in that humility, I might find that I am perhaps a little more willing than I was before to walk the path of Christ-likeness. See what Paul says? Forgive as the Lord forgave you. We are called to imitate Christ. This last bit is so important. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. It's easy, isn't it? We've just spent a few minutes meditating together on this verse, and already we understand so much more clearly what it is we are called to, how we are called to live, how we are called to relate to each other. We understand that we are called to reflect the reality of Christ in our dealings with each other. We are to live as those who forgive, as those who bear with our brothers and sisters in Christ. But here's the question. How can I do it? Where do I find the resources, the spiritual capacity to actually live like this? To actually obey what Paul calls me to? When the pain is so acute, when the rejection is so profound, when my whole world comes crashing down around me and there is agony in my soul, and it's there because of the way Christians have treated me. In that day, in that moment, where do I find the resources to forgive? How can I have the capacity to bear with people who have wounded me so deeply? Well, says Paul, forgive as the Lord forgave you. What's being called into question here is our vision of Christ. The depth and the authenticity of our understanding and our experience of Christ and how He relates to us. It's like a stamp coming down on a piece of wax and leaving its impression in the wax, shaping the wax to reflect its image. As Christ comes to me, as Christ relates to me, as Christ bears with me and forgives me, He's leaving His imprint. He's shaping my character to conform to His image. And it leaves me a little bit more able to treat others as Christ has treated me. Forgive, says Paul, as the Lord has forgiven you. So what is being asked of me is this: how authentic is my experience of being forgiven by Christ? Is it just rhetoric? Or is there a deep reality underpinning that rhetoric that shapes my character, that shapes my relationships with others? Because it is only as I am convinced that I have been treated this way by Christ that I will in turn find the resources to reach out to my brothers and sisters in Christ and in turn relate to them in the same way. Be able to forgive them, to bear with them as the Lord bears with me, as the Lord forgives me. Now, of course, the temptation is always going to be to step back into a way of relationship that is not characterized by the way Christ relates to me. To walk not in the ways of Christ, but in the ways of my, earthly nature, Paul calls it in Colossians 3, verse 5. But Paul has already called us to put that earthly nature to death. He has told us that we must rid ourselves of things, like in verse 8, anger, rage, malice, slander. It's so easy when we're hurt, when we're wounded, especially by those who are closest to us. It is so easy for us to give in to the rage, to give in to the anger, to allow that to shape the way we treat others. To be characterized by malice, slander, to gossip, to make sure that people have heard my side of the story, my interpretation of the events. But Paul has said, no, we must put that to death. We must rid ourselves of that. And instead, we are to put on Christ. We are to walk in the ways of Christ, to reflect the reality of how Christ has treated me. He has forgiven me. He bears with me. And I am called to reflect that in my relationships with others. Now, where can I find that vision of Christ? Where can I grow in my understanding of how it is that Christ has treated me? Where can I find that place of encounter and reality that will give me the resources to live as the New Testament calls me to live? Well, again in Colossians 3, Paul gives us the answer. Verse 16, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. Paul is writing to a church in Colossae. And what he is saying is that we must keep the word of Christ central to our fellowship and our life together. We're not to have the kind of relationship with the Scriptures that we would have with someone who we just meet up with every now and again for a cup of coffee, or somebody who we call in to see on an occasion when we need some advice. No, says Paul, the word of Christ must dwell in the church. Dwell in the church. We must have the kind of relationship that we have with those we live with constantly, day by day. The word of Christ dwells in us. It must be taught in our churches as we admonish each other according to the Scriptures. We sing the Scriptures so that they are rooted deep within our heart and soul and mind. And that is where we see Christ. That is where we will encounter Christ. That is where we develop that deep reality that will allow us to find the resources that we need, the capacity we need to live as the Scriptures call us to live. And we can reach out in Christ-likeness in our relationships with our brothers and sisters when they wound us, when they damage us, when they hurt us. And we can forgive and bear with them as Christ has forgiven us, as Christ bears with us. And so the church, it's like a gym where we go to develop the muscles of Christ-likeness. We have the strength to live in authentic fellowship with our brothers and sisters in Christ, forgiving, bearing with as the Lord forgives and bears with us.